So, for those of you who are joining or just jumping on, welcome back to the Influencers Journey show. Our topic today is influence a privilege or a responsibility? And we have been in a really good conversation. This kind of evolved as Taria and I were building out the show itself. And we were really digging into certain topics to make sure that one, we had a better grasp on it, but two, it's kind of where do we sit with it? What are our beliefs? And as we did it, we just found the most amazing and in-depth discussions evolve. So this is definitely one of them. Is influence a privilege or a responsibility? So, let's dive into really just looking at the first part of it. So, one of the things we started talking about, actually, I'm going to let you tee up how this came about, this particular question. So the question is, what's the difference between privilege and influence?
Yeah. So the backstory to this show is I had the opportunity to see a tweet. One morning I was just up, checking, social media, and I saw a tweet from Brene Brown saying that she was canceling her show. And so, you know, immediately got curious. I started to go through the tweets, and then it was this bashing session on Twitter about Brene Brown and her show. And for those of you who don't know who Brene Brown is, she studies or she speaks on the topic of vulnerability. So she
Hmm.
is definitely one of the people that I follow, read her books. I love her podcast. And so I was kind of, taken back an alarm that she was taking the podcast or pulling the podcast off of Spotify. But everyone was, of course, chiming in with their opinions and how could such an influencer, a person who is known for bringing vulnerable conversations into the marketplace, drop such a cryptic tweet with no explanation and just leave everyone hanging.
Mm.
And so I started to get curious about it and I started to do some digging. And it actually took me like about a week or so to find out exactly what the situation was. And so wh- her podcast is on the Spotify platform. And so those of you who are, listening to podcasts on Spotify, you may or may not have heard of Joe Rogan. And so Joe Rogan, he is a top influencer. I think he is the top influencer on the Spotify's platform. And there seemed to be a debate around our current issue of the pandemic and COVID and the information that's being dispersed, out there. And as I started to read and dig a little deeper, I had to come back to Suzanne and bring this question to Suzanne and says, you know what? Responsibility. What's the responsibility here? So is it because that we have the biggest and the loudest microphone? We can say what we want, put what we want without regards to our audience and how our audience sees us and how the influence that we have over our audience. So it's one of those big debates that I find that's happening a lot right now. The people with the big microphone, they're sharing information, and because the microphone is big, people tend to lead towards their side. But are you fact checking? Are you doing the right amount of research? Are you engaging in healthy debate? And when I say healthy debate, and that's one of the things that I think I heard Joe Rogan said that he is committed to doing going forward, having a healthy debate, meaning bringing conversations into the marketplace where they're not slanted just on one side, and you're giving the opportunity for opposition or great discussion to happen, and therefore your audience, they have the opportunity to make informed choices. And so as Suzanne and I, flush this out, we definitely said this needed to be an episode on the Influencer's Journey show.
What's interesting about it is it really comes back to, there's two pieces. In everything that happens, we have our biases. And you're in my wheelhouse right now, because this is a whole cultural competency, power, privilege discussion,
Mhm.
and I find this very intriguing. So we all have our biases, we all have our opinions, and then there's facts. And I
Mhm.
think the influencers that do the responsibility piece really well is they're able to discern between their opinions, their biases, and what the facts are. And so I can have a bias or I can have an opinion that doesn't negate the facts, or nor does it negate some truth. So that, I think, is the first thing. I think the second thing about people who influencers who do this well is that
Mhm.
although I have an opinion, you're entitled to your own.
Yeah.
And I can get, and I know I'm stubborn, so I can get firm in my opinion. I can get, a little stubborn in my opinion. What I in the world of Suzanne, I'm going to say that what I can't do is negate or bash you or make
Mhm.
your opinion a place where I get to discredit you, or um, just put you in a bad light for holding that opinion. And we're seeing so much of that right now, as we see people who are vaccinated, people who are not vaccinated, and we've got these polarized opinions, and people are just so emotional about it and not necessarily factual. And we've got these two camps slinging stuff at each other. And I think that's where, when you're looking at this whole role of influence, it is really an emotional check,
Yeah.
and pulling apart facts, opinions, biases, and when your emotions are running the show. And when our emotions run the show, we often get ourselves in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so true. And one of the things that stood out for me as we're talking about influence being a privilege or a responsibility, one of the things that came up for me in the responsibility aspect, especially in the example that I just gave, how when do you draw the line in knowing to do what's right versus going after viewership or going after views? And I think that that was one of the big debates, because once again, known for having controversial topics, which, like I said, is nothing wrong with taking, an opposing side or a side that's different. But when you do that just for ratings, or you do that, and it's kind of misleading in a way, because I want to almost say, like, better but you choose not to.
So now you're getting into, so let's just unpack privilege for a moment,
Mhm.
right? And when we were having this discussion, you said there was someone that you were speaking about, and you said, well, he has privilege, therefore he has influence. And I took the stand that just because someone has privilege
Mm.
doesn't necessarily mean they have influence. And you kind of looked at me and said, okay, let's unpack that. So privilege is access in my mind.
Mhm.
So I have privilege because I have access to education, and depending on what institution you go to, it may afford you more privilege. I
Mm-hmm.
have privilege because of socioeconomic status, and depending on where you lay in those things, gives you access. Some people have privilege, and this is what you were talking about, because of who their parents are,
Yeah.
and the tax bracket that they live in, and all the influence that their parents have. And you said they have influence, and I said no, they have privilege.
Mm.
And I said, there are many people out in society that have privilege as a result of their income bracket, the things that their parents have accomplished. However, they're not influential. They're not influencers. And if you remove them, and this is the key thing, if you remove them from the thing they do, they would, or their income,
Yeah.
their privilege would go away, or so would their ability to tell people what to do, if you will. In
Mm-hmm.
my mind, true influencers, and you see them in the marketplace, even when they stop doing what they did, they still have this thing called influence. One of my favorites, Mr. Muhammad Ali. All right. That man got a platform because he was a boxer, world champion.
Right.
He risked everything to take a stance against going to the Vietnam War. He was not going. He 4 years in prison, lost his belt, all those sorts of things. Another great documentary, by the way. Um, and and then 4 years stripped of everything for something he believed in, and as a result, he had influence over the thinking of other people. He had influence over how we began to challenge ourselves around, what am I doing, what decisions am I making. Mr. Ali, right, Muhammad Ali, has been out of the spotlight for years. He still has the ability to influence people. He hasn't boxed in forever. It is because it's not just what he does that gives him this thing called influence. It is who he becomes as a result of what he does. So one of the things, as I was unpacking this trio, what I realized is the influencers that the
The
stand
test of
the test
time.
of time, or
Yes.
they can move from doing A, where they got noticed, to B, to C. It
Yeah.
has a lot to do with their evolution and transformation as a human, as a person, and it has a lot to do with their character. What they did to get exposure gave them the platform.
Yeah.
Who they chose to become, and remember, this is always the question I'm asking, who they chose to become as a result of the platform is where influence lives. So Mr. Bartley's saying, I'm a basketball player. Yes, I'm a darn good basketball player. I have played da da da. I'm gonna stay as a basketball player, and I'm not. He goes, I'm not taking on the responsibility to evolving to something else. I'm not choosing that, and that's his right. And he'll always have some exposure, some influence, but to sit in that place of influencer,
Yeah.
I think it's a constant commitment to transformation. I think it's a constant commitment to becoming more, to challenging yourself, to checking your beliefs and biases and all those things, and being responsible when you put your opinion into the marketplace.
Yeah. And it's such a good distinction, and to be able to break it down, because once again we hear these words and these terminologies in the marketplace, but do we really fully understand what they mean? And so looking at the social media world, the word influence, or influencer I should say, seems to be tossed around a whole lot. And it really made me think, because looking at it from the high level view, you have people out there, who have the large following, they have a product, they have a service, whatever it is that they're doing out there in the marketplace. And then you take a look at the fan base, right?
Mhm.
And it's very easy for us to say, oh, wow, that person, has, a whole bunch of influence. And it almost seems like as if when they say, take this action, people are out there doing it, or people are striving to become more and more like them. But I really love what we unpacked. And what we unpacked is the journey to becoming. And so the true influencers, those are the people who we are able, to see their growth along the journey. Those are the people who, have a cause. Those are the people who stand for something in the marketplace, and then they become, endearing to us.
Right.
Okay, and then they know how they first understand that there is a responsibility that comes along with their influence, and which would bring us to our next question. So how do we use our influence?
This is a great question, and I want to really just clarify something, because you said they stand for something, and most influencers stand for something, and they stand for something with unshakable belief. Often is
Hmm.
really why I think we love them, and how we test their character is that when that belief is tested,
Hmm.
they stand firm. And that being said, I think the other part of it is someone can be an influencer and stand for something that you think is just horrible, that
Hmm.
you totally disagree with, that may not even be in your mind in society's best interest, and they
Hmm.
will influence a group of people. So when we look at Mr. Donald Trump,
Yeah.
and you talk about polarizing a nation. However, when you look at him, just to study him, his ability to influence
Yeah.
is interesting and fascinating, because he does it exceptionally well.
Yeah.
And so the one some of the things that's key about him is he does what he said he's gonna do,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not, whether you think it's right or not, whether you like how he does it, and whether he has to do some really interesting things to get there. And so he has a way of just being in the space,
Yeah.
and being consistent in some convictions that some of us will say, like, I don't get it. I don't know.
But the what one of the things that I found, and using him as an example, I found very interesting is very specific in his messaging and who he's speaking to. So, as much as we might take a look and say, that's crazy, like, what in the world is he talking about? What is he doing? There are people out there
Mhm.
who identified, not only with his vision, but they identified with his vision, and they believe that that's the leader for them, and where they're supposed to go, and who has the most influence, over them. So yeah, it doesn't mean when we take a look at influence, like where we are unpacking, we're not always going to agree or have the same opinion, but those people who are influential, they have people who are called for them.
And so, when we're talking about, how do you use your influence,
Mhm.
it's really um, a very one personal thing. I think the other part is it's one that you should be soul searching, in my
Mhm.
mind, because however you use your influence will become how you are known,
Mm.
right? And so I know for myself, I have been asked to put my name to something,
Yeah.
or to be a spokesperson for an area, that would have given me great exposure, and would have given me probably quicker exposure and more access to a bigger following, if I was willing to choose it. And when I searched my heart, I had to say, yeah, no, I'm not. at my core in alignment with that discussion. I don't want to be known for this.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't want to be to have this put limits
Yeah.
on where I can go and who I can become as a result. So I think, we one of the other question is influence is why is influence seductive? I think
Hmm.
influence is seductive because the more influence you cultivate, the bigger the following, the bigger the access, the more privilege you get. However, with those privileges and access comes a whole bunch of responsibility. And the question you want to ask yourself is, do I want that? Or do I want to be known for this? Do I want to align myself with this? Do I want to show up in this way? And for me, when I'm out of alignment, it hurts.
Hmm. Yeah.
It hurts. And the other thing for me is when I'm out of alignment, everything stops flowing.
Right.
So for me, it is, I have influence and I'm creating and building influence and working to become an influencer in an area that I'm passionate about.
Hmm.
And I'm very clear where I'm not
Yeah.
passionate, not my conversation. And I think it really is, if we're going to be responsible, is to really do our soul searching as we step out.
Yeah. And it's so key to be able to have, once again, going back to that awareness, because one of the things that I look at and I appreciate when I take a look at some of the people who I deem, influential, is just how they handle things on the journey. So I've also seen some influencers out there in the marketplace who sat out on this course, went through some lessons, learned some things, and had the opportunity to come back publicly and said, you know what, I made a mistake.
Yeah,
Right? I
absolutely.
didn't fully think this through. And now I have a difference of opinion, or a difference of, or a different way of thinking, and be able to shift. I also have, a lot of respect for people like that, because
Mhm.
I know it's not an easy thing to do. To know that, you stood on one side and things happen, like it does for all of us, but to be able to publicly come out and say, I was wrong, I made a mistake, and let's fix it, or I'm willing to do what it takes to fix it. And I think that that's part of, a huge part too, of the responsibility of influence.
Well, I think that also is what grows your influence if you want to stand the test of time. One is, a clarity in your conviction. And I look at the people I admire. So, if anybody knows, I'm a Malcolm X gal, that's my guy. I just love Brother Malcolm. And I love him because I love the journey of evolution in his life to being an influencer, and his ability to learn, grow, expand, become more, apologize, course correct,
Yeah.
keep moving. And with every evolution, you see a rise in power.
Right.
We see that with Oprah, a
Yeah.
constant evolution as she learns and grows, but a constant true north in terms of conviction. You see that with so many people. And, Martin Luther King, all these different people. And the thing that's really interesting is they started as me and you
Mm-hmm.
with an idea, a
Yeah.
thought, a passion, and a commitment. And I think what makes them influencers, and I think this is the whole purpose of the show for everyone who's listening, is it's a constant state of transformation, right? I'm convicted to this. This is my lane. This is the thing I'm going to do. And then I'm going to use this platform, whether it be a sport, whether it be acting, whether it be other, to have a voice on something that's important to me.
Yeah.
And as I have this voice, I am going to be responsible in terms of how I use it.
Yeah.
And I think it's those two things together that work. And so for everyone listening, as you look at influence is, where are you growing?
Yeah.
How are you becoming more? And what are you taking on?
Yeah, I love it. I love it.